Hello, and welcome to another session hosted by CFO Connect. This one is a bit different. We've done a lot of AI focused sessions these past few months, and we're now kind of going back to the basics, right? And talking about something that is, I think, near and dear to many people's hearts that's just not discussed about enough, which is the gender pay gap in finance. So, super excited to have three leading female voices in the industry that'll be joining me soon on stage to talk about the data we found through our surveys, real stories that they've experienced themselves from being women in finance, and also practical tactics that you can use in your day to day work as a female finance leader when it comes to gender pay gap and when it comes to just working in finance as a woman leader. So before we bring them on stage, my name is Luke. I'm head of community at CFO Connect. And for those who don't know, CFO Connect is a community for finance leaders. Anybody can join. And so sharing the link in the chat if you want to have a look about CFO Connect. And really happy to have people joining the session to learn more about this super important topic. What's super important as well is that just a few housekeeping items. We will have a Q&A at the end, so please make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A tab that you see on the right-hand panel. And as well, this session will be recorded, so you will receive an email after the session with the replay so you can watch it on your own time. That's it from me. I'll now bring on our speakers and we can get going on the session. So welcome to the stage, Vulnavia, Pauline, and Alyona. And so before we dive into the discussion, we'll do a quick round of intros. So starting with Vulnavia, we'd love to hear, a quick intro about yourself and why you're here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Luke. Hello, everybody from wherever you guys are joining from. I hope there are a lot of South Africans on the call as well as Zimbabweans. There are always so few of us. So my name is Vulnavia Kombora, and I am excited about this topic because, look, I've worked in South Africa, I've worked in Zimbabwe. I'm currently based in the UAE, and I work now for a European company. And so what you get from my 20 or so years of working then is understanding the cultural nuances that are at play in this issue. On the surface, I think what you have is wide data that says, it's probably we went and we gave birth or we went and we stepped away for whatever other reason. But there is some kind of cultural dominance that when I look at it, it just feels a lot as if the workplace doesn't want to have us there. And we'll go into it and what that looks like by region. But I'm very excited. I've worked in tech, I've worked in real estate, and I've worked in e-commerce. And so, I have the culture in terms of people, and then I have culture in terms of industry as well to fall back on and give you guys at least some tips on how to survive and make it to your 50s, 60s, 70s in a high paying place. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Vulnavia. A lot of teasers there. So excited to get kind of into the weeds there. Also, Nadine in the chat says yes to South Africa and Nambia all the way. So she fully supports that. Over to you, Alyona.
Hi everyone. Happy to be here. My background is different. So I used to be a CFO before building fuel finance. So I have like this both types of backgrounds, being founder and being CFO before. And from fuel finance perspective, we are building financial planning and analysis software for businesses. So actually, I'm originally from Ukraine, now in Spain, but moving to New York. So many changes. And yeah, happy to share today a little bit from my perspective. So what we see at Fuel Finance, because we have many female on leading positions and especially in finance. So happy to share a little bit my story today, what helped me to grow, and also from what we see at Fuel Finance for all other female in finance.
Thank you so much. And now over to you, Pauline.
So hi everyone, my name is Pauline Babel. I've been the CFO at Spendesk for nine months now, and I've been a CFO for 8 years now. And it feels like something 8 years, right? But I've been working I realized I was a female leader when I actually became a mother. I think that it never hit me before. So I would be happy to expand a bit more about maternity and back to work and when I think that my gender gap like rose in the past. So very happy to be here with my two peers here.
Cool.
Brilliant,
Thank you, Pauline.
inspiring leaders.
Thank you, Pauline. And I think, hearing your intros, we have a varied background in terms of culture, in terms of industry, in terms of experience. So I think this conversation will be very, very rich with lots of different perspective experiences from all three of you. So super excited to dive in. So before we jump into to the actual discussion itself, we kind of wanted to set the stage a bit with some data that we've pulled from our own surveys. So what I'll do is I'll flip on screen four, I think, quite an interesting data points that we've pulled. For context, for the last 6 years, we have surveyed, I think I did the tally. It was over 6,000 finance leaders anonymously about salary trends within finance. And so we did a bit of analysis, and we looked at, what are some key trends on the topic of the finance pay gap. And here four really interesting trends that we found that we'll also dig into during the discussion. So first of all, there is actually a positive note on this, is that the gender pay gap as of this year is trending in the right direction. And it's the first time in 6 years that we've actually seen the number decrease so sharply. So things are moving in the right direction. However, 13% is still a huge gap, right? Let's not lie to ourselves. And when you look at bonus payouts, it's also 29% lower. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. Interestingly enough, the hardest decade is the 40 to 49 age bracket, where I think we can assume maybe maternity plays a role here, but we'll discuss that further. And then lastly is the progression problem, which is quite interesting, where as you move up the ladder in your careers, you tend to see less and less female leaders. So also an interesting note there. With that said, let's jump into it. Just pulling up my notes here. This is a question for all of you. Right now, we're just going to more discuss about where we are today, kind of leaning into that first data point we found, where the gap is narrowing from 17 to 13% this year. I would like to hear from all of you. Does this match what you're actually seeing on the ground, or does the data feel ahead of reality? So, Alyona, I know that you've worked across hundreds of companies through fuel finance. What patterns do you keep seeing in how comp is actually set, regardless of what the headline says here?
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting, to be honest, just because we work like with CFOs a lot and also with different like finance leaders. Like, to be honest, we still see that there are like more men on leading position than women. And there are like not so many customers who have female like CFOs or finance leaders, to be honest. So it's definitely, I think, maybe in 80% we see like men on leading position and like 20%, to be honest, women. But from another perspective about like salaries and payroll, so I mostly can say about like our internal like situation. Like, yes, we are like an outlier. So we are female leading company. We have many females on leading positions and we have many people with finance background. So they just like going to product or customer success or like on different roles. So in our case, I see that maybe at early like stages, I see like that they're like very similar like salaries and payrolls and expectations. And yes, I also see when people growing, so even like the ask with the ask that they come. So I see that men still more like confident in asking more. So that's definitely the case. I should say that it depends, but overall, I still see that men ask more than women. So that's like from my perspective. So what we see like from interviews, so we do like hundreds of interviews, definitely like per month, so hiring new people. But yeah, that still is here, and I think that It's improving. Like, to be honest, it's improving even like from VC perspective. So we are raising, and I see more females in finance from from VCs. So that's a very great point. And I see like the growth here, significant growth. It's already a pleasant situation, but I think maybe that's an impact over the last years because we're started all like to focus on this issue and bring more power to women. So that's I see this some kind of results, but we are not there yet, like, to be honest. And I can say the same like about my journey. So yes, it was like even like more complicated. I think that's the current stage and what we have now.
Cool. No, thank you for that. And Pauline, when you think about your day to day at Spendesk, do you feel that as well, or where do you think this also falls short?
Yes, for sure. So women don't self-nominate at the same rate, as men. So I totally agree on this one. But I think that the way we need to be intentional as leaders, not only as female leaders, but about that. So I think that the promotions that should not be, that should be processed with, let's say, a promotion process and calibration process cross departments and cross managers to make sure that it does not rely only on people, putting themselves forward, because at least I think that men out beat women, and it will be for a long time still. So I think it's good to have like neutral and try to neutralize, let's say, to ungender those processes as much as possible. So I also would recommend like maybe salary grids when it's possible for us at Spendesk, like for quota carriers, for instance, we are using grids for hirings, and it's taking the gender question apart. So I think it's super powerful. I would be super enthusiastic about bringing more grids to the rest of the org, but today it's not there yet. And I think that when it comes to increases, so salary increases, they should be driven by individual performance metric only, with again calibration, and not by who asked loudest. And by the way, I've never been the loudest person in the room. I'm an extrovert, but it does not mean that I am like super skilled when it comes to ask for myself. So I think that the more the process is covering for both male and female, the best it would be for the company. And just before hanging to Vulnavia, maybe like just a step back on the data itself. I think this 13% gap, I think it only captured the women who are still on the job. So I think that the reality is maybe even a bit worse. Because we are just measuring the women at least after 35 who came back to work, actually. Voilà.
Yeah. No, very, very good point on the end as well. Yes, definitely, definitely. And Volnavia, I know that you've worked across South Africa, now the UAE. Also, you dipped your toe in Europe. So this 13% gap, does it have the same meaning and significance across different markets? Like, how do you see that also in a nuanced approach?
Yeah, so it certainly doesn't. Like Pauline said, I think the big thing is we're seeing measured data of people that are still participating, right? And so when you look at markets like Africa and the UAE, what there've been extensive studies and they've looked at, okay, we have high participation rates seemingly in South Africa, but there's a huge gender pay gap. And part of the reason is actually not because people weren't paid what we didn't want to give them. It's because there seems to be a selection process at a firm level where women tend to be sorted towards the lower paying companies. So they're participating really, really well. But then they end up at lower paying firms as opposed to their male counterparts. I mean, I certainly was one of them in the very beginning, where for the kind of work and the skill that I had, somehow I was maybe because of whatever structural and cultural issues, because I was Zimbabwean in South Africa, whatever it is, I ended up at a lower paying job and I had to work my way. And that's the reality where you see, I think it's about in Europe, you have that sorting index, it's about 25%. In South Africa, it's about 45% of women, they end up at these low paying places. And so the pay gap is because of something structural like that. Then in the UAE, it's actually quite different. You have of 120% of women decide to work, and the ones that actually decide to work highly, highly educated. And so the gap is 13%. But it's 13% when you only have 20% of women going into the workforce. And so when you walk in the street and you ask a person, you ask a VP of finance like myself, you ask the next one, you ask the next one, what you hear is that we have a master's degree, we have a professional qualification. The next woman that you then ask, they will tell you that, no, I'm a nanny, I have high school education. So it's almost like a sorting off. Is there a preference for women? Why is it that women in the UAE, they end up with such disparities? The middle, there's no middle, right? We're basically churning it out in some capacity. And I think for me, the biggest eye opener here was the structural issues.
Yeah, no, super interesting. Thank you for that. And kind of now segueing to the next question, which is the second data point we flashed up on the screen, which was at the manager level, there's near parity, but as you go higher and higher up the food chain, there's less and less women. And so I'm wondering, Pauline, I think, you made a good point during our briefing call about the differences in maternity care and work and cover country to country. So we'd love to hear from you on that point.
Yeah, I've been working in a group which was between France and Germany, for instance. And my peer for the German scope, because I was working for the French scope, was like a maternity leave, actually, parental leave. It can go up to 3 years when it's for German females. But in practice, women come back after 12 to 18 months into a role that's been quietly reallocated. It was the case of my counterpart in Germany, which was super hard even for me to live. And she was, draft to project that has moved on with a manager who has mentally, moved on to without her. So I think what is compounding here is the part-time trap, because I call it this way. I think this is completely understandable when you are looking at the, life balance that you have to maintain, the kids, etc. But part-time, it's still coded as, like not serious or not too strategic. And to get promoted, well, you have to work on the most exposed topics and challenges for the company. So to me, I think that's maternity leave plus part-time, which is, I think, like super obvious in Germany, because they have this concept of raven mother, like the bad mother not taking care of the kids. It's a bit less in France, but I think it's also existing. I think that we need to change a bit the mindset around that to make sure that the pay gap can actually reduce. And again, I think that the female, the women interesting me in this pay gap are the one not answering anymore because they are on parental leave. So I think that at the end, the career penalty, even in France, even in maybe other Southern European countries, it's not distributed equally for men and women with parentality, but other events can occur as well. So we must, as leaders, design systems that can fix or at least limit the damages of just events in life. But maybe I think we don't have the same opinion on that. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, but Vulnavia, look, I know that you also had quite an opinion here, so feel free to chime in.
I mean, it's a little bit more nuanced than not agreeing with you. I certainly see it. Like if you're gone for 18 months, the 100%, you left, your manager doesn't think about you anymore. There's almost I heard a saying once that the organization is always looking forward, right? And so when you have an 18-month, 36-month hole, you have to fill it, right? And you're going to fill it very, very quickly. What's interesting is almost there's a difference in how women are viewed, like women that have given birth and are mothers from a Western perspective, which I'll cut it off and I say cut off the Middle East and then going up on the Western side of it, there's a way of looking at it like you're no longer interested in the work. So you cannot be involved in these conversations because you don't have the time, right? You have to pay for the care that you need to give to your child. On the other side of it, there seems to be a premium to being a mother as far as, well, look, this person is reliable because they have a child, right? So our problems are not so much that I went and I gave birth. My problems start earlier when we start talking about initial promotion. Initial promotion, it's more about, is this person worthy? And that worthiness, if your culture is patriarchal, like South African culture is, Middle Eastern culture is, worthiness really is measured on you versus another man. So what you'll find is that of 100 of us, 83 are likely to be promoted and move to a manager, whereas a man, 100 of them, 100% will move into manager. So that mismatch keeps on compounding. So by the time we even speak about middle management, even if there's no pay gap, the pay gap that started way before, we never got to those places because of some kind of bias. And a lot of the times with this kind of bias is it's actually almost not intentional. This is what's absolutely mind-boggling about it. And so I like your cure, which is there has to be some level of intentionality, because if there isn't, we're going to, it's going to keep going. If you stretch this out at this rate, Luke, where you said your data is 13%, 70, it's going to take us over 100 years just to get to 99%. So our spreadsheets will tell us there's a problem here. Let's use our spreadsheets just to say, flag it as a start. Timmy and Mary have different pays. Just find a way. And so I think intentional policies and systems, there's no other way around that.
No, thank you, Vulnavia. Super good point. And I think actually that's kind of where I want to go next is actually a few examples of being intentional and seeing that impact. So we're now going to switch gears a bit and talk about what's actually working currently for you three. So I want to ask this question to Alyona. You know that in our briefing call, you had mentioned that the majority of your management team are women, right? Including AI researchers, engineers, and you mentioned that women on your team are actually pushing AI adoption faster than anyone else, which is super cool to hear. So would love to hear from you. How did that happen? And any like specific tips or tricks on how you made that actually possible?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's really interesting case, and we have many female managers and like also finance people, but they're leading as example now. And I think though this is a very cool point because we talked with you about maternity leave, and I just now remembered another case. So the one person in our team who is pushing that the most is actually a head of our success team who is female, and he just recently gave a birth to her baby. And actually, the reason why she pushed AI because she wanted to automate as many things as possible because she has a baby and she wants to be like very efficient. So she came back like after like two months, I think, from maternity leave, and it was like her initiative, and she just like started to find ways like how to be more productive because she need to have this high level of her self management and also managing the whole team. And she started like to find different ways how to automate like QBRs with AI or any other things that her team like is doing or some things that she needs to do. And she started like to show all of that things to her team. So I did that and that with AI. This is like how this, for example, part saved me like 40% of my time. And it started to work. So, and another three women in our team, they started to do the same things. And we started like to share all of that in AI adoption chat. And I did the same. So I shared like for the whole team what I made for myself, like what I automated, how much time it took to build it. So how was it complicated or not? So I just like made a real-time webinar explaining the things. And we see that it works, but that's actually the funny thing that uh, the person who actually pushed it the most, the person who actually tried to find a way how to be the most productive because she has a baby. So I think that's an interesting case, and that can be a leading case, I think, for everyone who are like female on leading position or even like not leading position. So that's actually can help like to be more productive and how to be also promoted because now we have this situation where we're like, okay, what we can include about AI part in promotion because it doesn't matter anymore. So from my perspective, like I ready to pay two times salary for the person who, I don't know, adopt AI and can do like, I don't know, more things than other person can do. And it doesn't matter if this person works 8 hours per day or 5 hours per day, if their output that actually is coming from this person is very high. So this is, I think, another way how we can solve the problem like this of salaries for different people, because I think that AI people who actually use AI and especially like if women can adopt AI faster. so they can actually have higher salaries than any other people on the market.
Cool. Thank you for that, Alyona. Just also to pause and remind the folks, if you want to ask any questions, we'll be taking a few minutes at the end to answer questions. So please do feel free to drop anything in the Q&A tab. I know that time is speeding by, so we'll just jump to the next section on kind of what are the things that need to change next. And so this is a question for Pauline. I know that you're trying to be intentional about pay equity, as you mentioned before, but also you mentioned in the briefing call that even finding women in the pipeline in fintech is super hard, and they're unicorns in a sense almost. And so, what's one concrete thing that you've actually done to help maybe find women in the process, whether it's a process, a policy, or a habit that's made a difference?
Again, like not mentioning positive action, but at the end, I think that getting women in the pipe, not having women in the pipe is not acceptable. I think, like even in fintech, of course, I think when it comes to engineers and developers, we are like any other industry. This is super hard to find women, and it's not even about salaries for engineering. It's about really like fueling this pipe of talents. But when it comes to other, like I think that we've made great efforts in go-to-market organization, which is like roughly 40% of the company in marketing, sales, account management, customer success functions. I think we can do a difference here and make sure that the salary gap is not increasing. But my message might be like for CFOs, female or male CFOs listening to this, we have a role to play as leaders in our leadership teams or excom. I think we should look at our data when it comes to compensation and promotion of the last 3 years, for instance, and we can maybe design an agent for that. And to make sure that even in our house, like the house is clean. I mean, like looking at those numbers, we don't want to do it because we kind of know the results won't be, super good. But before it gets, mandatory in European, in EU, to be transparent about salaries, etc. Let's not make it a compliance exercise. Let's make it to just improve the things in our own business and companies. Just looking at the data, in the eyes. That would be, I think, the best call to action today to keep closing the gap.
Cool. Thank you for that. And Alyona, I know that you have built a lot of financial systems from scratch for hundreds of businesses. For you, kind of what gets quietly baked into the comp structures early on that nobody questions, and how do you change it once it's there?
I think like, do you mean like constructions early days, like from financial side, from the
Correct.
technical side?
Yeah.
I think like from our perspective, we see like a lot from data quality. So this is the part that actually I think the most complicated now. So all companies, and I know that all CFOs heard that from their CEOs and founders that we need to bring AI to finance, but and all of that, let's use like 3 people and do work of 10 people. So I totally get it. But actually the key point and the key problem that all finance teams and CFOs are facing now, this is the data quality and readiness of this data for any AI, for any automation, because actually like the point that we use so many different like software now, like for different like, tasks and goals, but the key goal that we need like to actually have one place with all this data to run AI on top of it. And I know that some CFOs they spend years like to clean this data. And to be honest, there are like no any AI solutions now in this industry yet. And it's still very manual work. So even like AI, but human is still very involved in this process of like making this data clean. And I think this is like, like some backend part of all finance teams. So everyone see this forecast, dashboards, reports, but this is like some very complicated work which is behind. And it still takes a lot of time and still a big issue. And I know that some people like start this process like years before you start like to implement any AI. So this is something that I think is still like very complicated and need to be fixed on the market.
Cool. Thank you for that. Also, there was the data point that I flashed up on how the gap widens in the 40s before recovering in the 50s. And I think that's a decade potentially a lot of the audience is in right now. So, question for Vulnavia, you've also been in a lot of environments of uncertainty, especially now in the UAE, I have to say. And so, how do you think people should approach this decade of just holding on from what the data shows? And also, why do you think that there's such this gap in the 40s before it then kind of closes up in the 50s?
Yeah. So I think this is almost like the hold on period, right? Like, hold on, you're almost there. Once we get to our 50s, we're going to close the gap. Reason that I see is probably, I think there's a drop off because when you dig into it, it doesn't feel as if women truly get supported. And the support that I mean is, we get into the workplace and we're told that we need to get mentors. But I mean, I spent so much time collecting mentors. I could throw a stone and somebody has given me advice. But any time that I have fallen because of whatever reason, it is because I simply didn't have a sponsor. I simply didn't have somebody in my quarter that would, in my corner, going to bat for me and saying, like, this person is great, or promote them, or give them more pay, etc. Because we remember when I said that it sometimes feels as if the workplace is not for women. When a man is a man and he asks for money and he just does whatever it does, the organization moves to back him. When we do the same with the exact same energy, there are different labels that are then attached to it. And if that's the case, then we actually need somebody to sponsor us, to almost be a voice, because it's not that we don't talk because we don't want to. And I feel the drop off that you then feel in your 40s. I am not 40, even though I'm answering this question. I'm soon. So this is what I'll need to learn. So I'm speaking to myself here as well. Is that part of it is that you now have intense pressure. That child that you bore, they've gotten to an age where they really, really need attention now. Your parents are probably getting older. And especially if you are in the Middle East or in Africa, there's a little bit of pressure to take care of your family. And the person that society expects to step away and take care is really the woman, right? For us, it's not a case of is it expensive. Childcare is not expensive. But what's expected is that mothers ought to be present. You ought to take care of your in-laws, all of these things. So we have a 42% drop off because things are getting really, really difficult. The time expected, the strategic conversations happen in bars. They happen in the middle of the night. They happen in areas that sometimes we can't even be in because I need to rush home, right? So that rush home just removes your own backing. So to answer your question on what causes it, I think it's a structural one, and we could probably spend an entire day saying, okay, we are going to need sponsors. We're going to need to make a plan in terms of how we're going to take care of mom and dad and the kids, make sure that they're truly independent. And society, please stop asking me how my kids are doing, because now that mom guilt, and I'm sure, Pauline, you felt it, mom guilt manifests itself not even because somebody did anything, but because also you're missing out on so much as your mom. And we're built to care a lot. The second part of your question, which I'm trying to then remember, is how then do we hold on? I think Alyona really hit the nail on the head with AI, right? When we're not present, we're judged sometimes on presence, but AI can do the work whilst you sleep, right? So you can wake up and you can say, look, you were talking strategy with PT, my agent went, and this is what they did. And you can also start to use AI to objectively measure the input, because what tends to happen as we go up is that there's a very intense subjectivity that creeps into boardroom conversations. And we come out of them and we say we were so objective. We did not. We did not. We looked at who was the most vocal, who said a lot of things, even though they were empty words that they said. So AI enables at least an objective measure. If you can mine the data, you can objectively see what that output is. And then AI can be a tool for you where you can be in the room, so to speak, 24/7 at least. And then your productivity 24/7, or at least, 16/7 as much as possible. I certainly do like her solution as far as the cultural issues. Our spreadsheets are helping, but not fast enough.
No, thank you for that. Super insightful, also very practical. Um, and I think this also is a nice segue into our final question for all three speakers, which is, taking a look back at your careers, and let's say, 10 years ago, what's the single most useful thing that you know now about advocating for your own pay that you didn't know back then when you were fresh out of uni for first time on the job? I'll start with Pauline. Is there anything that comes to mind that you wish you had known back then that you want to share with the audience now?
When I started my career at EY, they were already using grids. So it was like no gender gap when it comes to a grid for junior analysts. So I think that was great. But I think that the gap actually it was for my first kind of C-level director level when it comes a bit, it's a bit more into the wild because the benchmark are not, now we have CFO Connect, right? But it was a bit scarce at the time. And I had to negotiate and to defend let's say, the value of my work, that I was definitely thinking my value as a person. And I had a lot of difficulty to make a distinction between both. And as a woman, like it's like, oh, money, like, oh no, I'm doing just my job. No, I was doing a brilliant job. It's just I was not good to sell myself, and I'm not a salesperson. I'm a finance person. So I think that this is the advice I should have. I would have loved getting like 8 years 8 years ago. Like this is the fair value of your work on the market. Take what you have to take, and by the way, they have headroom for any negotiation that might come. So pretend you are like the best person of yourself and go negotiate. Hurt yourself in this, you will be praised afterwards. That would have been a great advice, I think, 8 years ago.
Cool. Thank you, Pauline. And Alyona, over to you. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that there are like actually like so I also was in PwC, so it was similar situation to Pauline. So it was like pretty clear bias, no changes, but actually just because there are like more, I think, finance people who are coming like to startups, especially like early stage startups, early stage companies. So I think the good point is like to learn like lessons from sales. And what can I say? What can be like very practical? So how like usually like you do sales. So you first of all present the value that you bring, and only after that you name the price. And you always can start like with higher price and go down, but you can't start from the lowest price and go up. So that's actually some tricks that you definitely can use when you talk with your managers about your salary. So first of all, be proactive. So you can ask the manager like what value you are bringing, what your KPIs. So make it very clear. So what you need like to achieve for the next like 3 months or next 6 months or 12 months. And after that, so bring this value up front. So what you've done, what value you brought to the company, how you impacted metrics, numbers, results, whatever. And only after that, when you discuss the value and your manager agreed with the value that you actually mentioned, only after that discuss your salary. So this will be the strongest position to have in such discussions. And I think another key point, so what I think, like from my perspective, what will impact the most your salary, first of all, it's AI adoption. And actually, we are all newbies in that. So everyone in the same position. So if you're even like at the earliest like stage of your career growth, so AI can actually bring the most value to your salary. So if you can show that you're like the one person, so we see that from engineering side. So if like you're one person, you can bring 2 3 times more like output, so you definitely can expect way higher salaries than all other like people. And here you can think like of 2 times salary, even like in such cases. And I should say that companies ready to pay that if you actually provide such way of output. So my big like I think thought will be like AI adoption and how you can actually speed up the whole finance processes with AI can bring you the most like growth in your salary.
No, it's super interesting. I think the topic of AI has naturally come into this conversation, but I've never even thought about it as a tool to actually arm women to have a better advantage versus men, let's say, right? Where like I think it was either Vulnavia, I think you were saying more about, being able to have more an objective look when you're in an executive meeting. Alyona, AI adoption, just trying to make sure you're keeping pace with kind of the demands of the role. Super interesting. And Volnavia, over to you to close things out. What about you? What are your thoughts on this question?
Okay, so I'm not a PwC alumni. I am from BDO, so that's something. But you actually made me, in talking about where you started, you made me remember like a very weird memory. So I started at BDO during a hyperinflation period, and hyperinflation meant that whatever we had been what had been agreed upon last week, it wasn't enough, right? So I remember my first salary ended up being $25. And we would write a letter to the main partner and we would say to him, look, we refuse to work. This is ridiculous. We can't do it anymore. And he would come down and stand in the middle of the audit room and he would basically scold us because his argument was we didn't even know how to do a bank reconciliation. So how dare we ask for a new salary? And look, I'm green. I am still a child. So I accepted that. And so what I took away from that when I looked back at that very sly businessman is don't accept the first offer. Don't accept what it is that they say about what you are actually worth. And Leona's approach of value, you need to be so clear on your value that when somebody speaks, you don't agree with them. I had a manager before telling me that, I told him, I have this offer. I'm going to this place. Do you have a counter? Because I really, really like it here. And he said, well, that's a lot of money for you. We never went into what that meant. But what if I hadn't been clear at that point of what my value was, I would have actually agreed. And I've had conversations with my own sister, for example, who's not in this call, who did not take a role because she felt it was too much. So she took she said the money came with too many responsibilities. Well, here's a fun little tidbit for you. Over our lifetimes, men will out earn us by about $500,000. That's a lot of wealth. If you put that in the bank, that compounds. You won't need to work as hard. You'd probably have a better house because you'd have better mortgage rates. Your children would probably go to better schools. So the mistakes that we make very earlier on, they compound. So that's one. Don't accept the first offer. Get a sponsor. We are trained socially to be invisible. This is a very difficult thing for us to overcome, no matter how much we try, because when we do try, we end up on the other side of the spectrum and the system spits us out. So get somebody who can champion your cause, whoever that might be. Don't ask for advice. Ask for somebody to be in your corner. Okay. And then we now live in an age of objective information. Instead of, as Pauline did, where she said, this is what I'm worth, etc. There's a lot of information that tells us this is where I'm benchmarked. The market is actually paying 50,000. So at least you can reduce the disparity by being within what the market is and knowing your value. That one I cannot emphasize enough. If you don't know it, then I will determine what it is and I will pay you whatever it is that I want.
Amazing. Thank you, Vulnavia. A lot of thought-provoking topics there and really lots of great data as well. Unfortunate data, let's say, but I think it really drives the point home, right, on long-term impacts of this gender pay gap. So we're going to wrap up here. I've actually just frantically went on LinkedIn and got all of the speakers' profiles because I want you all to be able to connect with them in case you have any questions. So I'm sharing them in the chat now so that you can connect with all our speakers. As I thought, this was a really rich conversation, lots of different insights and experiences shared. And I hope you all watching today found something valuable that you can apply in your own work today or tomorrow. So with that, I want to thank all the speakers for taking time out of their day to join us today. As a reminder, an email will be sent about an hour or so after the session is over with the recording. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. So thanks again to our speakers, and we wish everyone a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.